Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Great stuff to talk about again this week. Well, Tom Barrett says he's in. He will run for governor. That will make for an interesting race. So we'll talk about that and other politics as well. Also, why are there so many empty beds at the Milwaukee County Jail and the old House of Correction? And we'll talk about what kind of play we can expect from this year's edition of the Milwaukee Brewers. We have some familiar faces today. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. You know Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. And Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, first thing we have to talk about, Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett says he will get into the race for governor. So if Barrett survives the Democratic primary, it would once again be Barrett against Walker. The question is, does Barrett win this time?
I don't think so. I'm really upset about how the Milwaukee voters got shortchanged in a real race for mayor. There's been no true articulation of the issues that affect Milwaukee and what leadership change or leadership retention will do in order to make this a better community. And so now he wants to take whatever that record is and run for governor, and he's going to face a very testy electorate in a primary. He doesn't have the backing of the major unions, certainly not the government unions. And so it's an uphill fight for him. He's utilizing funding that was given to him for another race, and I'm certain that there will be a handful of folk that will ask for that money back. But will it be enough for him to beat Kathleen Falk, who will be better funded, that I do believe. And so he could face an embarrassing loss in the primary. It also creates a lot of discombobulation at City Hall because you've got folk now that are looking at the election for Common Council president and determining what their leadership is going to be and what does that mean if there's no Barrett there, who moves up, who becomes interim, who will assume other leadership roles in the Common Council. I just think it was a very selfish decision and not one that respected this community.
Denise,
but so be it.
Did he have a responsibility to tell people before this that he wanted the job of governor?
Well, I think when people asked Tom Barrett what he wanted to do, he said he was making up his mind about what he wanted to do. I think the fact that he has been as thoughtful about it as he has been, I'm sure certainly reading all the tea leaves and looking at all the polls before making a decision about whether or not he wanted to engage in this kind of race that surely, no matter who is running against Scott Walker, is going to be very bitter, very negative. I mean, the negative ads that we've seen this past week with the Republicans, that's a warm-up to what we're going to see, unfortunately, in this election, the recall election. So I think he was very honest about what he was doing. I think that Tom Barrett has made a decision about what he thinks is in the best interest of the Democratic Party and the state for him to enter into this race. And I think it's a smart thing to do. One of the things that unfortunately Kathleen Falk did right out of the barrel was to really tie herself so closely to the unions that she became the union's candidate. I think Tom Barrett sees an opportunity for himself to be seen as the candidate who wants to make Wisconsin a better place. And I think that allows him to attract more moderate Democrats. It allows him to attract some independents who may choose to vote in a primary election. I think the interesting thing that we're going to see is how much mischief the Republicans may have if they decide to vote in the Democratic primary and who they decide to vote for. I don't think that Scott Walker wants to run against Tom Barrett again. I think he would much prefer to run against Kathleen Falk. So I think that's one of the interesting things that we'll see. Will we see in the primary race for the Democratic nomination, Republicans crossing over and potentially voting for the candidate that they feel that that Walker faces a better chance in defeating?
Kevin, do you think the election is going to be about whether people like Tom Barrett or like Kathleen Falk, or is it going to be about people who don't like Scott Walker?
I think it's going to be about whether or not you like Scott Walker or not, and I think those lines have already been drawn. Those who are non-committal at this point, that number is pretty minuscule, I think. I think people have pretty much made up their minds as to how they're going to vote in this thing. With Barrett entering now, he does not have such an easy path. Remember, in 2010, he didn't have a primary opponent. He got a free pass. Now he's got a tough road to hoe, and the big question I have at this moment is, where's the money coming from? It's not coming from the unions who don't want him in the race and have told him they don't want him in the race and have asked him not to go into the race. I think it's coming from Team Obama out east. I believe they wanted him to run, and they have told him that they will give him some financial backing, because otherwise I don't think he would have had a very, very well-funded campaign and would not have beaten Kathleen Falk. He still may lose to her. I don't think people understand, really, and this is everybody, the quick turnaround that's going to take place here. Right. Tom Barrett doesn't really have a lot of time to raise money, get organized,
5 weeks.
Hire a staff, get office, get message out. That's going to be real tough when you have a primary that literally is, what, 5 weeks away? It can be very, very difficult.
But the reality is everybody in Wisconsin knows who Tom Barrett is.
Sure they do. And it's kind of hilarious to me listening to these Republicans anguishing over the tough time that Tom Barrett is going to have.
Not anguishing. I love it.
Clearly, that's the candidate they don't want to run against. And
Why?
because he's the strongest,
he's
the strongest candidate.
We beat him once before.
And clearly one of the few talking points that Scott Walker has in running, because clearly his first year in office, the entire state lost jobs when it was actually gaining jobs at the end of Jim Doyle's term. The only thing he keeps saying over and over is union bosses, union bosses, union bosses. And here's Tom Barrett, the strongest candidate, not in the pocket of the union bosses, but he's going after the union vote. That's the first thing he talked about today. So many of it has been hilarious to me to just review what we've gone through with this recall campaign, when the Republicans made up all these phony issues about there were going to be all kinds of fraudulent phony signatures. There were four signatures got struck because they were made up names, and those were, of course, 4 Republicans that put down phony names. And they were saying all kinds of these votes will be thrown out. 3% of the signatures were disqualified, and mostly that was for technical reasons that had nothing to do with any real problems.
Sure.
So 3% out of 900,000 votes. And here's the real key to the race. How many of those 900,000 signatures turned in were by conservative union members who voted for Scott Walker? We know that Scott Walker and the Republicans have always gotten conservative union votes. Well, they're not going to get it in this recall, and the union members realized they were bamboozled. They were, the first thing this governor did after they voted for him was kick them in the teeth and take away their bargaining rights. And that's going to be the key to the election. And I think, yeah, you're right. Tom Barrett is going to have to quickly start running an aggressive campaign. And I actually think he ran a more aggressive campaign the first time than most people give him credit for. Mm-hmm. You saw those debates between he and Scott Walker, and everybody's going to be watching them this time as opposed to last time. He wiped up the floor with Scott Walker in those debates, and I believe that's
well, I think you're assuming, Joel, and I think erroneously, as usual, that it's going to be Barrett Walker.
But you're assuming that, and you're terrified of it.
And I don't think that's a given. Again, he did not have a primary last time out. He lost by a sizable margin.
The way your heart is going out to Tom Barrett for having such a tough race this time.
The other thing you have to remember
No, my heart is not going out to Tom Barrett. I love it because this sets up a very bitter primary where Democrats will be at each other's throats, not only campaign-wise, but money-wise.
Republican presidential primaries. But the other thing they have to remember is that one of the things that happened when unions, particularly WEAC, endorsed almost right out of the box Kathleen Falk, was that there was a lot of grumbling in the union membership about whether or not WEAC should have come out that quickly to endorse Kathleen Falk. So the fact that she's been endorsed by the union doesn't necessarily mean she has a lot of union support. I think Tom Barrett sees a sweet spot there where he really is not the candidate that has caused all this disruption, heartache, and hard feelings. He's not the union's candidate. He's the candidate for people in Wisconsin who want to see us get back on track.
He's another tax and spend liberal who has done nothing for the city of Milwaukee.
Get more talking points, Kevin.
Unemployment, especially among African American males, is sky high. And I'm not sure what his message is going to be.
And what did Scott Walker do in terms of trying to decrease the African male unemployment rate when he was county executive just 2 years ago?
And trying to shut down the new plant that opened in the black community, the Talgo train plant.
All right, next topic. I don't think I ever remember anyone in law enforcement or the judicial system in Milwaukee not complaining about overcrowded and expensive jails. Well, this week, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke said he's got so much available space that he could handle more prisoners, hundreds more. He could handle 200 more, he says, at the county jail and 500 more at what used to be called the House of Correction. So Clarke is saying, let's cut back on things like day reporting centers and electronic monitoring and lock more of these guys up. I don't necessarily know if that's a horrible message.
Well, I do. I like the sheriff. I'm not a law enforcement expert.
But you'll play one on TV today.
Well, common sense tells me that you do lock up violent criminals and have them serve their time. But people who are in front of the courts for nonviolent offenses, especially in this community where we've got an intensive effort to identify all those small crimes that people commit and have them accountable for those small crimes that in some communities would be a ticketed offense. You don't lock people up for that. It's expensive. It takes a toll on people's reputations and their ability to get jobs, their ability to be more positive in their communities because they've got stiffer penalties hanging over their heads that they have to address, as opposed to something that's a lot more reasonable and manageable for them personally and for this community as well. So, you know, because the beds are available, that doesn't necessarily mean that we ought to throw people in there.
Are the beds available, Kevin, because we're a much safer community than we were years ago?
Well, if you talk to or listen to Ed Flynn, who's obsessed with numerical data and trots it out every time he tells us that his police department is tremendous, and I respect the men and women in uniform. But if you listen to Ed Flynn, sure, it's they're doing a terrific job, and maybe so. Maybe our tough on crime initiatives are working. I don't know. It's hard to buy that though, especially when you do have judicial leniency, when you have plea bargaining, when you have watered down sentences. I don't know. I think I'm sorry, we should be even tougher than what we have been. And non-violent criminal, there's no such thing. We don't lock up people and throw them in Waupun for jaywalking. Non-violent criminal.
We do lock folks up for embezzlement.
Use of nomenclature.
We lock folk up for smoking marijuana. We do a lot of things that have no other victim other than that person committing the crime.
Should the goal be to have as many of those beds filled as possible, or as few as of the beds filled?
Of course not. Yeah, Gerard said he's not a law enforcement. I'm not a law enforcement expert, but I'm married to one. So, and the thing about Sheriff Clarke is he's totally out of step with everyone else in the criminal justice system who recognizes that the old ways, the most expensive alternatives, are not the best ways. Incarceration should be the last resort, not the first, and it certainly should not be the first resort for, as Gerard says, folks who are arrested for nonviolent offenses. David Clarke has tried to shut down every alternative program under him. There's a day reporting center for nonviolent offenders where they get drug treatment, jobs, they get job training, anger management, they get lots of good positive things. He has made it so in order to go to that program, you have to get up at 3:30 in the morning to get there. And he's reduced the capacity in that program. There used to be some 300 inmates getting those good services. It's now around 50 under him. The thing is, the day reporting center has a high success rate of getting rid of recidivism, like 85% success rate. You know what the success rate is in someone who is incarcerated in the House of Correction? Sheriff himself has said more than 70% are recidivist. So that's the failed program. The incarceration is what's failed. What works is all these alternatives that people are trying. You know, that locking someone up costs $140 a day. Having them on a bracelet where they're monitored full time, we know exactly what they're doing, costs $11 a day.
See, I love this because when people like Joel and Denise too like to throw money down a rat hole, all right? They love to just spend money willy-nilly. Suddenly, when it comes to the criminal justice system, they turn into fiscal
not only is it
conservative,
expensive, but it doesn't work.
Well, there's also there are costs. Can I just finish? He went on forever.
No, I'm not saying anything.
Kevin will finish.
There's a heavy cost. I'll be brief. There's a heavy cost to crime. Your legal fees, your court fees, and there's a societal cost to crimes too. A cost that is inflicted upon the victims, which is substantial.
No, it used to be that every politician
which we never
had
hear
to
about
say, "I'm tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime" to get elected. Is this? Are people now saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be tough on crime?
I think what we've done is we've gotten smarter. We don't assume that being tough on crime means you automatically lock somebody up. I mean, that's a very simplistic way to look at what's a very complex issue. It's not always a safe way, because what happens is
better than putting them on bracelets.
Recidivism. Are you going to let me talk or interrupt me? You've already talked 3 times. Just turn it all over.
And I never get interrupted on monologue TV here.
But what I'm trying to say is that what we have found that just locking people up does nothing to really solve the issues of crime that we have, because these are folks who end up going back out on the street and reoffending. If we have programs in place that provide people with services that allow them to be rehabilitated, it's less expensive and it works. The question and the decision that we have in this community about whether or not people need to be incarcerated shouldn't be based on whether or not we've got available beds. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense at all. The issue is whether or not it is good, appropriate, proper law enforcement to incarcerate people based on the crime that they've committed and the risks they pose to society.
Well, gee,
not whether or not you've got empty rooms, you know.
Let's ask the average citizen, do you feel safer if a violent criminal is
We're not talking about violent criminals.
Or
if he's out there on a bracelet?
We're not talking about
I know what people would say.
But this is not about violent criminals. Don't twist what the story is about. It is not about violent criminals. But it's about whether or not there's available space.
If somebody breaks into your house and burglarizes you, do you want them to go to jail?
Yeah.
Or do you want them to go to a day reporting center?
I want them to suffer the penalty that the law calls for. One of the things, though, that I think this is a very politically charged retort to the county board, which is going to change. The leadership there will change. The makeup of the board is going to change, and the sheriff will have to go back and get his budgets approved in front of a new board. And I think what he's doing is setting up the scenario for dealing with that new board with his budget.
But if you incarcerate everybody, that's what leads to the budget problems. That's why the sheriff's budget is in trouble, because he wants to go for the most expensive option instead of what works.
So you don't like it that there are beds available, but if there was overcrowding, you'd be moaning about that too.
All right, next topic. Last year was proof positive that a well-managed small market baseball team can compete with a team that has a huge, huge payroll. But this year, the Brewers don't have Prince Fielder. Ryan Braun hasn't looked spectacular in spring training. With opening day just around the corner, we have to ask, do the Brewers have the potential to be a playoff team once again?
Absolutely.
Every year you say that. Every year you say that.
Yes, we don't have Prince Fielder, and you can't really replace Prince Fielder. But you know what we do have that we didn't have last year? We've got K-Rod as the setup closer for all year instead of just half the year. We've got Corey Hart, who was out for a month of the season last year.
Please stay healthy.
Will mostly be ready to play by opening day. We've got Zach Greinke, who was out for a month of the first of the season last year. We're going to have him from the start of the year. We've got the entire pitching staff back, which was the spectacular, part of this team that took them to the playoffs last year. Ryan Braun is going to be great because he's mad. He's going to be ready to prove, he is just as good as he thinks he is. I'm looking forward to it.
Do you write off Ryan Braun's performance in spring training, which hasn't been great? You say not important?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think once he gets over the first few home games here and faces the crowds and determines just how much of that past issue he's got to grapple with still, I think once he gets over that hump, he's going to be an effective producer for us. Baseball hope springs eternal for us here. And I really feel good about it. We've got the pundits telling us that we're going to come in third place in the division, and that I don't believe.
What's that?
We got the baseball pundits telling us we're coming in third place, and I don't believe that. I think we're going to do much better. Well, it is possible.
We do have a team called St. Louis in our division.
It's also
Without
possible that we'll still be able to make the playoffs because there will be 5 other teams that simply won't be as good as we are.
Does Braun get a standing ovation on opening day when he comes out?
I think so.
Yeah?
I think fans are not only fickle, but they're forgiving, and he may not get the same reaction on the road, but here in town, I think the Brewer fans especially. And they have really turned this franchise around too, are appreciative of his talents on the field. But people are going to have to step up their game. The Corey Harts, Matt Gamble, we don't expect him to be Prince Fielder, but come on, he better produce. Jonathan Lucroy, I think there'll be great pressure on him to come through. And the pitching, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee, even though they are good pitchers. There's no guarantee they're going to have the same kind of year that they had last year. And for heaven's sakes, they do have to, like all other teams do, have to survive injuries. They have to stay away from them if at all possible.
Do you guys agree with this new ticket pricing they have going on, where some games are considered great games, marquee games, so the tickets are higher priced, and that's just the nature of the business?
It is. I think it's just the nature of business, and of course you all know what I know about baseball. It could fit into this cup with plenty of room to spare.
But you would go crazy if they had Aaron Rodgers say, "Please welcome Ryan Braun."
Oh yeah, I mean that would be great. I mean, we like to be entertained. We like our teams to do well. I think that just purely off the field, because I don't know anything about that, I think they're going to have a good season because of what's happening financially to the team. I think we can expect that sometime fairly soon, when they announce what their ticket sales are looking like year to date, they're going to be very, very good.
Wow.
We already know that the team is worth twice what it was when Anastasio bought it.
Well, they're a very
I think they're going to be a great team, and they're going to be entertaining.
Money and go make deals, which I think they're going to do. This is not the team we see on opening.
They need something they're going to go after.
The team we see on opening day will not be the team we see like midsummer.
All right. Well, maybe it's all the technology that makes this year's political gaffes seem so frequent and helps spread them so far and so fast. Technology could cut down on those gaffes too, but some politicians seem to have a different agenda. Here to explain, writing and editing consultant Rick Horowitz. Rick.
Here's the deal. Every week or so, Rick Santorum puts his foot in his mouth and has to spend time retracting and apologizing. JFK's speech on church and state made him want to throw up. Barack Obama's a snob for urging kids to continue their education. Or Santorum says something easy to yank out of context and has to spend time defending and explaining. I don't care what the unemployment rate is going to be, or Mitt Romney is the worst Republican in the country to run against Obama. Meanwhile, Santorum takes great pride in never using a teleprompter. Think there's a connection there? The Republicans hate teleprompters. Why? Because Obama uses one. If Obama uses one, there must be something wrong about it. Santorum has actually said it should be illegal for presidential candidates to use teleprompters. They're just reading someone else's words, he says. You'd think Obama was the first guy to ever use a teleprompter or a speechwriter. Anyone remember how Ronald Reagan first became famous? He was a movie star, reading other people's words. He did it in the White House, too. But when Obama does it, oh, that's different. It's a trick. He's trying to put one over on us. By the way, anyone who's ever watched Obama handle questions at a press conference or wrestle Republicans over budget policy and still says the man can't think on his feet without electronic assistance hasn't been paying attention or doesn't want to know. Anyway, is there really a moral difference between looking down at a speech printed on paper and looking up at a speech scrolling by on a glass screen? For that matter, why is it worse to actually think about what you want to say ahead of time? to respect your audience enough to choose just the right words in just the right order to say what you need to say, instead of spouting whatever damn fool thing pops into your head. Have I mentioned that I use a teleprompter? True. And nobody writes my stuff but me. Here, I'll show. Jane, can we bring another camera around? Let's show them what I'm talking about. See, here I am, and here's my camera, and right over the lens, that's the teleprompter. Those words, can we get a close-up? Those are exactly the words I'm saying right now, see? Even words like see, okay? Okay. Okay, why am I telling you all this? So that the next time you hear more Republican teleprompter foolishness, you'll be prepared, and you'll be perfectly ready to read between the lines.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. We'll be off for the next 2 weeks because of the holiday season, so have a great Easter and enjoy the rest of your weekend.